Welcome to another screencast where we'll be discussing aspects of the immune system this time, and we're going to break this into three screencasts here. So this is immune system 1, so by the end of this you'll be able to describe and explain the direct cell-to-cell communication mechanisms. This differs from our indirect cell-to-cell communications that we've seen in endocrine system and nervous system. Be able to describe and explain the basics of the lymphatic system and the relation to the immune system, and then a little bit of detail here about lymphocyte origins and functions as they relate to T cells and to B cells. So let's get started. So in previous screencasts we've been talking about cell communication and this distant communication from so in the endocrine system here, this endocrine cell that's releasing a hormone here into the bloodstream and then traveling to a target cell some distance away from that cell. So that's a distant communication, and then here's a little bit closer communication over here between a neuron and another neuron right here. But again, there's a chemical receptor, there's a chemical messenger here that is released from one cell and then travels to receptors on the second cell there. So those are other mechanisms, but there are some instances in multicellular organisms where the cells are actually connected together, and we see this in we see this the unity here in gap junctions between animal cells. We see this in cardiac muscle cells as an example, and we see plant cells, the plasmodesmata here. And so in this case the cells are connected to one another via these little bridges, these little cytoplasmic bridges here, and molecules are able to just freely diffuse from one cell to the next, and they don't have to cross a membrane or anything like that. So this is another mechanism of cell-to-cell communication. And then here's yet another mechanism here, the cell-to-cell recognition, where you have one cell docking and binding with another cell right here. So you have signal or surface proteins on the surface of both of these cells that are complementary, and when these surface markers here, these surface proteins bind here, you then get some sort of response triggered here in this second cell. And again, that response is going to, of course, vary. So different mechanisms of cell communication. A little transition here. The lymphatic system provides a way for white blood cells, the leukocytes, and immune cells, and returns leaked fluid to the circulatory system. So this is kind of coming out of left field maybe, but this lymphatic system in mammals is picking up leaked fluid, right, and white blood cells from the circulatory system. If you're confused about this or you have a little more questions, we can address that in class. But suffice it to say that all of these are lymphatic vessels here picking up lymph, and then there's a lymph node and there's a lymph node. I want to point out this thymus gland right here, which in young mammals is quite prevalent, and that thymus gland sits on top of the heart. As we age, this thymus gland atrophies or will go away. It shrinks as we get older, but we still retain these lymph nodes, a heavy concentration here in the armpit and in the neck area, as well as here in the groin region. Also want to point out the bone marrow here, especially red marrow and yellow marrow, and these are sites of white blood cell production, right? So this thymus and this bone marrow are places of not only white blood cell production, but white blood cell maturity, right? And so it's the white blood cells that play a role in the immune system, and specifically the cells that we are talking about are lymphocytes, right? And so lymphocytes are types of white blood cells. These lymphocytes are, of course, produced in the lymph, right? And so the lymphatic system, which is why they are lymphocytes, are literally cells of the lymph. Now again, that lymph is leaked plasma, but not really cells, not really red blood cells out of the bloodstream. and is then picked up by these lymphatic glands. This is what we see here. So here's just a blood capillary, and this is a red blood cell, and then there is plasma here. This plasma will leak out of capillaries, and you get this blue right here. That's the interstitial fluid. Right? This interstitial fluid is then picked up by these lymphatic capillaries here, this lymphatic vessel, and then the black arrows here show you the direction that that lymph is going to travel. So if the fluid is in the capillary, it's called plasma. If the fluid is between the cells, it's called interstitial fluid, and if the fluid is in the lymphatic vessel, it's called lymph. Now that lymph will travel through all these vessels here, and it's all traveling in this direction, but occasionally it's going to pass through these lymph nodes, right? And so this is a lymph node right here, and you see that the lymph is passing through these one-way valves in the vessels. The lymph is passing into this lymph node. Now hanging out in this lymph node are masses of lymphocytes and macrophages, and again, these are the immune system cells. So this is where they kind of hang out, and they're monitoring, looking for any invaders, any pathogens. Pathogens, classically viruses, bacteria, fungal spores, and as well as any sort of parasites, worms, eggs of worms, all sorts of nasty things like that. Insect larvae, things like that. Anything that would have penetrated into the bloodstream here, and then potentially have gotten out, leaked out of here, traveled out of the capillaries into the interstitial fluid, and then into the lymphatic system here. So these white blood cells, these lymphocytes and these macrophages hang out in these lymph nodes, right, and are monitoring this lymph as it passes here. Incidentally, that lymphatic fluid will all drain back into large veins right here in the neck region, and then be returned back into the bloodstream to keep the blood pressure constant and up. Okay, so if you are sick or fighting an infection, the macrophages and the lymphocytes will increase in numbers greatly, and your lymph nodes will then actually swell and become a little bit hard and swollen and larger. So if you are sick, you'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will kind of palpate or feel here in your neck, might even feel your armpits here, because there's a high concentration of those lymph nodes there, and he or she is checking to see if indeed those lymph nodes appear to be swollen, in which case that might indicate that you are sort of fighting some sort of infection there. Okay, so these lymphocytes are white blood cells which mediate the specific immune response. Of the lymphocytes, you have two different flavors here. You're going to have, let's skip to the bottom of this, you're going to have B cells, and you're going to have T cells. Now these B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes are derived ultimately here from bone marrow or cells in the fetal liver. So this is a pluripotent stem cell. This is undifferentiated. This is an undifferentiated stem cell, meaning that it can be signaled to become a lymphocyte stem cell. And now this lymphocyte stem cell can, if it travels to the thymus here and matures in the thymus, we get a T cell. So the lymphocytes that are produced, or that mature in the thymus, are called T cells. This is why they are T cells. The lymphocytes that remain in the blood or in the bone marrow are then referred to as B cells, and so they're going to mature. So this is mature, and this is mature here. Regardless, both these B lymphocytes and these T lymphocytes are now referred to as lymphoid tissue, right? And again, they hang out in the lymph nodes, the spleen, in the blood, as well as the lymphatic fluid. So these are really all over the body, and they are monitoring, right, the fluids in the body. Again, monitoring for pathogens. Monitoring for pathogens that it may have breached the skin, breached the the bloodstream, etc. So not only pathogens. Let me just go back a slide here right? And just to remind you again, here are these pathogens, but I neglected to say that cancer cells are also treated sometimes as pathogens. So cancerous cells or abnormal cells in general will also in some cases trigger immune responses as well. So you've got cancer cells as well as those pathogens. Okay, so just a little background there. When we are now going to look at this, not in detail right now, but this is the general map that we're going to follow for the immune system and specific responses. So we will look at a humoral or antibody-mediated response as well as a cell-mediated immune response in the next couple of screencasts. Okay, so you should be able to now describe and explain this direct cell-to-cell communication mechanisms, the basics of the lymphatic system and its relationship to the immune system, as well as then a little bit about these two different types of lymphocytes, the T cells and the B cells. In subsequent screencasts, the next one we'll be dealing with, so this is screencast number 2, we'll be dealing with the T cell situation, and then in screencast 3 we'll be dealing with the B cells. Okay, thanks for listening. Bring your questions to class.